Okay, so yesterday we did the oven space. Okay, so we had space in the oven for 140 boxes of cookies. And so you came up with a graph that looks something like this. All right, our green points were on the line, which represents 140 boxes of cookies, or below the line, okay, which were under the 140. All the red dots represented more than 140 boxes of cookies, so maybe 80 and 80, which is 160 boxes.
Attention teachers and students, now can I have Coach Newell's homeroom to report to Ms. Langford's class? Coach Newell's homeroom to report to Ms. Langford's class.
Okay. We also went in and verified our equation. So you see this equation is x plus y equals 140. So we took the green combinations, whatever those were. One of them was 65 and 65. So we did 65 plus 65 and then checked that that was either 140 or less. So this was 130, so it was fine. Okay. All of these, all right, I have two that aren't. So these two, 70 and 80, that's a red dot on the graph. 100 and 100 is a red dot on the graph because the total gave me something that was above my oven space restriction for the problem. Then we looked at just the time, okay? And we pulled up our time graph, and we did the same exact thing for the time. All right, I'm going to pull up my time graph as well. All right, we came up with all these points that worked for the time. All right, all of those points had to be either on or below the graph. So we may have had like 50 and 50, okay? Now, that's not going to quite use up all of the time. Okay, you can see it's under that blue line. I can verify that green point algebraically. This is what I did in part 2b. So now for the x value, I'm plugging in 50. And for the y value, 0.15, because it takes 0.15 hours for each y. I'm also plugging in 50, okay, for each iced box. And you can see that that's equal to 12.5 hours. So that means to cook 50 boxes of plain cookies and 50 boxes of iced cookies, that it's going to take me 12 and a half hours to cook that amount of cookies at the bakery. All right, which makes sense. That's why this point, 50-50, is right below my line.
Attention teachers and students, now can I have Dr. Dean's class to report to Coach Rick's room? Dr. Dean's homeroom class to report to Coach Rick's room.
Okay, so we went in and did our 10 green points. We found those 10 green points. We found the other points that were above the line as well, the red points. Okay, found 5 of those. Now, today we're moving on to number 3. Okay, so number 3 says, are there any points, which is combinations of plain and iced cookies, that will fit the oven space restriction, but do not fit the time restriction? And how do you know? All right, so what we're going to do for number 3 is we're going to take our time graph, and I'm going to actually type in also up here, I'm going to also type in the oven space line that we had in the first graph, okay? And that was just x plus y equals 140, okay? So I have that graph in there also, all right? And we're asked, are there any points that work for the oven space? Okay, let me go back and make sure. Any that will fit the oven space that do not fit the time restriction. So essentially what we're asking here is, are there any points that were green for our purple line, all right, for this line, the purple line, that are not green for the blue line, which represents the time? So we can see 50-50 50 plain, 50 iced actually works for both restrictions. It is going to be under 140 total boxes of cookies, right? Because 50 plus 50 is 100. And it's also under the 15 hours total that we have where our bakery is open to cook cookies, okay? So are there any points that worked for oven space that don't work for the time? Well, let's look at that. Maybe 70 and 70. Let's try that. Because remember, that was one of the very first ones that we said. It was right on the line. All right, it's right equal to 140. But this point here, 70 and 70, it looks to be above that blue line, right? So let's just verify that that's going to be more than 15 hours. So how much time will it take to cook 70 plain, 70 ice? So I'm going to plug that into my time equation. So 0.1 times 70 plus 0.15 times 70. Okay? And we see that that is equal to 17.5. So in order to cook 70 plain and 70 iced, it's going to actually take us 17 and a half hours to cook that combination of plain and iced cookies. Since our bakery is only open for 15 hours, that's the only time that we have available, this is not possible for us. We actually cannot make 70 and 70 because even though it fits in the oven, it doesn't fit our time restriction. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Okay, so this would be a perfect point. We would find any other point that's on there. I mean, you could even look at, say, 140. All right? That point there is also on the oven restriction line. It's equal to 140, but it's going to require too much time. It's above the blue line. All right? It's going to be above the 15-hour time limit that we have. So there's a lot of points that will fit in the oven, but they don't necessarily fit for the time restriction that we have to be open. So any point like that is going to be what I'm going to show in my number 3. So I would take a screenshot of this. I would go back into my number 3. So are there any that will fit in the oven but do not fit the time? And I would just explain that. I would say 70 and 70 will fit in our oven because that equals 140 cookies. But when we checked it in the time equation, it actually took us, 17 and a half hours to cook, which is over my 15-hour limit that we have for our company.